Outsiders. Good morning and welcome to Outsiders, the show that is to political correctness gone mad, woke identity politics and socialism on steroids. What the new president-elect of Argentina, well, let's let him explain.
Y esto solamente lo puede hacer un outsider, lo puede hacer un tipo que viene de afuera, y no cualquier tipo de outsider, porque está llena la historia de outsider que se meten en estructuras preexistentes.
Yes, that's the president-elect Javier Milei of Argentina. I'll be talking about him later in the program, and he seems to know, well, he's got a soft spot for outsiders is what I'm trying to say, with some difficulty.
Nosotros somos outsider, porque somos outsider sin estructura precedente, que la construimos para esto. ¿Para qué? Para sacarlos a patadas en el culo.
I think that roughly translates to, we outsiders have kicked those feral socialists to the curb. Hola!
Una Argentina distinta es imposible con los mismos de siempre. Basta de la joda.
And now let's grab the latest Outsiders news.
Only next to Javier Milei are you just understated, and low energy, and yes.
I think
need to
he's
be more
great.
animated, Rowan. Be
I
more
think he's
animated.
great. I think he's great. I think he's been watching this show, Rita and James, very, very closely. But there's lots happening there in South America. All the socialists all around the world. We're going to be talking to Ralph Schulhammer later in the show, about what's happened in Holland. The socialists have taken a hiding there in Spain and so on. Also, we'll be looking at what is happening with the hostages which have been released. But let's start off with one of the most grotesque things that I've seen in Australian politics in a long time, and that is Marine Faruqi. Need I say more? Here she is, photographed, standing next to the most vile anti-Israeli poster. Let's have a look at that, Rita.
Yeah, the astonishing thing here is not just that that poster exists in 2023 in Australia, that a Greens senator would pose in front of it, that she would then herself post that image on her own social media pages.
And just explain to people who haven't seen it what the girl next door is holding.
This wasn't some sort of a setup. Well, let's have a look at the picture. She's got a picture of a bin
This was
there.
a protest at Town Hall in Sydney on Friday.
And as you can see, if we zoom in there, it's basically saying, you know, the Jewish state should not exist. It should be.
It's saying worse. It's saying keep the world clean and keep and put Israel in the rubbish bin. Now, I mean, this just goes to show how the Greens Party is so shot through with the most virulent anti-Israeli sentiment that they would think that this was a perfectly acceptable thing to put up there.
Well, but it's a child holding it.
It's a child holding it. But Marine Faruqi posted
it
on her Instagram. And the thing that I'm reminded of here is, you know, do you remember how Tony Abbott was, you know, beaten up all over the media because he appeared at a rally and somebody else was holding a ditch the witch sign about Julia Gillard, and they lambasted Tony Abbott and from one end of the media to the other.
Yeah, he didn't even see the sign. This was behind him. He didn't post it on his social media.
That's what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. He didn't post it. Somebody else is doing it. He had no association. He didn't put his arm around. Anyway, Marine Faruqi knew exactly what she was doing, and she attended this anti-Israel rally, which would have been full of people who supported Hamas. You know that these rallies are not, you know, about Zionism or peace or any of that sort of thing. There's such an element in these rallies, in these protests. You know, we saw that at the very start of the conflict, after Hamas massacred over 1,000 Israelis, before Israel had fired a shot in retaliation. They were down at the Opera House screaming, "Gas the Jews!"
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
That's what this is about.
It's disgusting. And Sarah Henderson, the senator from Victoria, Liberal Party, she brought this to our attention last night. Seriously, Marine Faruqi should be punted out of Parliament. I mean, this is just disgusting. It's not good enough to just delete the tweet. This is a schoolgirl holding up a sign basically saying that Jews should all be put in the rubbish bin. It's racist beyond belief. It's verging on genocidal. It is a hate crime. It is inciting hatred. And a senator, a Green senator, is standing there happily alongside children. I'll be talking later in the show about the abuse of children that we have seen by the left in this country with all these pro-Palestine marches and what that entails. Marine Faruqi must go. The Senate must demand that she goes. It is an absolute disgrace.
Well, she had the walkout. She led all of the Greens in the walkout. Let's not forget, it's not just her. When she stood up and had her tantrum in the upper house and then got up and walked out, every single Greens senator followed her. So this problem is not limited to one person. There's a problem within the Greens. There's a problem within the left. And I think the one small positive coming out of this ordeal is that there are a lot of people, including in the Jewish community, who are realising that the people that they've stood by, who thought they were allies, are nothing of the sort.
100%. And we've certainly seen it with Penny Wong and other members of the Labor Party who endlessly have to equivocate. It's always, oh, anti-Semitism is bad, but so is Islamophobia. So there's this endless moral equivalency. The lack of leadership by Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party. You're right, Rita, to point the finger at the Greens. They're the worst offenders, but the Teals aren't far behind. There are plenty of Teals, and if you are sympathetic to Israel and you're in one of those Teal seats, I'd be thinking very, very closely about who to vote for at the next election, because we've seen the Teals going down this same Green route of antipathy towards Israel, overt sympathy towards the Palestinian cause. We've also seen it, of course, Labor, the Greens, the Teals. It's a disgrace. At least Peter Dutton has the one leader in this country who has stood firm with unequivocal, unapologetic support for Israel, which is what any right-thinking person should be at this point in time. We've got the latest news of the hostages being released. We might have a bit of footage of that. That's happening now, James.
Well, I was just going to say that one of the things about the Greens here is that this pulls the entire left wing of politics, into this very sort of dangerous, dark, anti-Semitic territory. This is one of the reasons why, and we know for the longest time, Labour has been very divided on the issue of Israel. This gives succor and comfort to the enemies of Israel in the Labour Party, because they are able to now get the upper hand, because so many Labour seats are under threat from the Greens, and the Greens are making more and more inroads into these seats. They're just completely distorting the nature of Australian politics on this issue.
Well, you say divided. I don't think they're divided. I think there's one Labor MP who's come out. Is it Josh Burns?
There are a few.
We haven't heard many of them. All we've heard from
Bill
Labor,
Shorten.
all we've heard from Bill Shorten, sure. All we've heard from the government is this endless moral equivalence, moral relativism, where they cannot separate a legitimate act of self-defence on the part of the Israeli Defence Forces and the murderous, vile rampage by a bunch of barbarians. They can't distinguish between the two. Shame on them. That is a failure of leadership at the very top of Australia, Rita.
Well, yes, and you mentioned there Bill Shorten, and you do wonder, as Anthony Albanese continues to falter, and he's faltering on multiple fronts, whether Bill Shorten is just sitting back and counting them weeks or
he
months
should be. He should be. Absolutely.
He launches the leadership challenge.
Let's just run through it all. Albo's leadership is a joke. It's an absolute joke. We've been saying all along, but people have gone, oh, no, all the other commentators, oh, no, he's doing really good. They're really good on foreign affairs. Rubbish. They've been a disaster on every single front. We've got Chris Bowen out there now. His entire strategy is thrown on the rubbish heap. We've got the United Nations have come out and said, you get to net zero by going nuclear. The COP28, next week, COP28, we're sending this clown Bowen down to Dubai, where the entire strategy of COP28 is let's go nuclear. We've got more uranium than anyone else in the world, and we've got a goose at the top of our energy politics saying we won't have nuclear. Bowen has no role there at Dubai. As I will say later on the show, Rita, James and I would be better off going to Dubai. We would be more in line with the thinking of COP28, James.
Well, we would certainly have more fun, too, but that's another issue. The thing is, though, is that this is also, you mentioned, Rowan, Bill Shorten a moment ago. This right now is a golden opportunity for Peter Dutton, and I think he is seizing it, because right now, Labour is failing on all of the grounds that the Liberals and the coalition do really well on. You know, you mentioned foreign policy before. Well, let's think about how China played Albanese off a break at that APEC summit. Let's talk about how we've just had the first boat land on Australian shores since Operation Sovereign Borders. That, again, so border security, foreign affairs, and economic leadership. We're looking at interest rate rise after interest rate rise. This is all being driven by the mismanagement of Anthony Albanese, who has no grand narrative for what he wants to be as prime minister, except to be prime minister.
No, except to fly around the world. He wants to fly around the world, taking selfies with Gwen Stefani and pop stars. Nice work, great work. I'd love to do that as well. Terrific. But we actually need some leadership in this country. That's what we require. You haven't mentioned, James, as well, letting in Gazan refugees, people from Gaza. Now, we know from the opinion polls that 75% of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank approve of the Hamas barbaric activities of October 7th, the rapes and the murders. They approve of them. We're letting in several hundred people from Gaza. Are they being screened to find out that they don't hold those same vile anti-Semitic views? And if not, why not? Let's now talk also about the fact that they let, until Peter Dutton came along and saved the day, they were happily letting any number of these detainees, hundreds of them, pedophiles, rapists, murderers, out into the streets of Australia. Dutton saved the day.
They're still letting them out. They've just got ankle monitors.
Well, no, not in WA. They don't have ankle braces. They don't have the ankle braces. So, I mean, but on this Gaza thing, again, this is an absolute disgrace. I think we're talking about 860. They have been coming over quietly since October 7th.
Yep. Let's have a quick look. We'll come back to this, but let's have a look at the hostage footage coming out now. This is now happening now in Israel, Gaza. Keep going. OK, let's have a look. Here we go. And so the hostages were released this morning.
So there was a bit of a delay in the exchange, but it's finally occurred. I think we've got some footage of it. It's late in the early hours.
2 in the morning there.
Yeah, in the morning. So it's not like the last exchange where you saw the hostages, you saw what condition they were in, and some of those. One of the women couldn't even walk the short distance between the two vans. She had to be carried. The rest of them looked bewildered. And yeah, here we've got the last exchange. And yeah, again, delays, Rowan, in this occurring, but thankfully it has actually finally gone through.
I mean, this is a kind of bittersweet thing. I mean, it's fantastic that hostages are being released, but let's not take our eye off the bigger game, and the bigger game is that Hamas has to be destroyed and the Israel Defense Forces have to get in there and they have to utterly destroy Hamas. Otherwise, this evil will keep recurring and keep recurring. And a ceasefire is terrific, but a ceasefire does mean that gives opportunities as well as hostages being released, which is wonderful and fantastic. But it does mean hostages from the Hamas side, in other words, in Israeli prisoners, some pretty despicable characters will be being released along in the exchange, because that's what an exchange involves. Gemma Tognini had a terrific article in The Australian yesterday in which she pointed out the tragic history of the 1,000 Palestinians who were released a few years ago in exchange for one Israeli hostage, and amongst those released were, of course, the individuals now responsible for the mass murders and rapes. So you release your hostages from either side. It's great news for one side, but it does mean some
it's a
unsavory
terrible predicament.
It's an awful predicament. It's a hellish predicament.
You have to do it. It's necessary. I know there's debate about this just incentivises more hostage taking. You don't negotiate with terrorists. We know all the arguments, but if your child is being in Gaza for over a month, being subjected to God knows what, you would do anything to get them back. 100%.
And this is why I say it's a schizophrenic, bittersweet moment, but we mustn't take our eye off the ball, James.
Well, no, that's right. But I think we also need to not have any illusions about the nature of Hamas, about the nature of the Hamas Charter, that it is follows the Islamic rules of war, which talks about Hudna treaties, which is that any treaty is only for temporary advantage, and it is never to actually make peace with your enemy. So let's just remember, going to Rowan's point about Hamas, it must be taken out, and it must be taken out ruthlessly, because otherwise that will continue to occur. Well, but the other thing, too, though, the other issue, though, is that you also need to deal with the funding for where it comes from, and that is Iran. And that is the Biden administration. The Biden administration has enabled and empowered, as did the Obama administration before it, Iran and Iran's growth as a serious regional power and terrorist player in the Middle East and around the world. And until that is dealt with, you're not going to see this sort of behavior stop.
Oh, of course. And the Israeli Defense Forces are correct that the only reason, it's not, some kind of gentleman's agreement in World War I to stop fighting during the trenches or whatever. The only reason Hamas are releasing these hostages, let's be crystal clear, is because they are scared because of the degree of force that the Israeli Defense Forces are hammering down on Hamas. We saw the hospital. We had all the left for weeks now saying, oh, no, Hamas don't put any tunnels or weapons under hospitals. Well, they've now exposed that the main hospital there, Al-Shifa, was, of course, the centre for the fortress, if you like, for Hamas, with the weapons stockpiled, tunnels, a whole system underneath. And it is critical that Israel finishes the job and destroys Hamas. That has to be the primary goal, Rita.
Well, it does, and we keep seeing atrocities in Gaza committed by Hamas against their own people even now, even in the midst of a war.
Precisely.
There's footage that's emerged of two men who were accused of being spies, collaborating with Israel. Who knows if there's any truth to that, but of course they were killed, their bodies hung up with crowds gathered, cheering,
iPhones
filming
going,
it.
Barbaric scenes.
And this is what I don't understand. We had the student protest in Sydney on Friday, Melbourne Thursday. Nothing there about, let's free the Palestinian people from Hamas. Let's get rid of this genocidal, hideous terror outfit that has just inflicted such suffering on so many people. There's none of that. I mean, how can these kids who are being allowed to be used as useful idiots of the activist class not even get that message across?
Well,
because it's very
it is
simple.
child abuse. I'll be going into that in shortly. It is child abuse, James. But let's go back. Sorry, Karen.
No, I was just going to say that, Rita, you ask a very good question. How is it that people look at this footage? They look at people holding up their iPhones to record a lynching like it's a Taylor Swift concert. And how do people look at this and think, this is wonderful, and what's happening with young people? And, people don't understand how, for decades now, the schools, the academies, the universities have been shot through with a ideology that celebrates revolutionary violence. So for these guys who have been infected with this way of thinking, they look at Hamas and they think, this is great. This is liberation. This is, what some academics and professors were tweeting. This is what decolonization looks like. They actually, for them, the violence, the brutality is a feature. It's not a bug. And that's the really scary thing. How do we almost deprogram, this whole generation that has been infected with this idea? Because I'll tell you what, it's not going to stop in Israel. It's not going to stop at Gaza. It is going to be everywhere. We saw it in New York overnight. There's horrendous footage where a teacher in Queens had been revealed to have been at a pro-Israel protest. The students held a riot. 25 police had to protect her in a classroom.
She was hiding in a locker. She was hiding in a locker.
Yeah.
I mean, and it again shows you, because we didn't see marches in the streets of Melbourne or Sydney or London or New York when Muslims were being slaughtered in Yemen or in Syria. If you can't blame it on the West, if you can't blame it on Jews, they're not interested. So it's part of this dogma.
And this is a failure of political leadership, Rita. And you've been talking about it on the show. We've been talking about it on. all these shows for years about the corruption of the education system and the fact that successive governments, Liberal and Labor, have done nothing to clean out the grotesque neo-Marxist world of academia, which our kids are being put through. Let's talk, just go back to a couple of local things. Adam Bant, while he's not busy hanging around with Marine Faruqi, decided to hop into a wetsuit made of fossil fuels, Adam, in a kayak made of fossil fuels, Adam, to go out and wander around and protest against fossil fuels. Adam, you're an idiot as well as a hypocrite.
Rowan, you know who else is an idiot, though? Is the New South Wales Police Minister, Yasmin Catley. In the otherwise more or less sensible Chris Minns government, you have to give him a bit of credit on some of this stuff, but Yasmin Catley, his police minister, allowed this 30-hour kayak naval blockade of the port of Newcastle, which sends coal and food and grain and Australian products around the world so that they could protest climate change. And she said it's great to see people speaking out because we know where things are going. She is enabling this. And the worst bit about this, too, she's also the member for Hunter, where all of that coal comes from. So I wonder how how her local electors feel about her running down their industry.
Well, she's floundered on multiple fronts as well. We saw her response. The Jewish community were up in arms after the first of the pro-Palestinian marches and the catastrophe we saw at the Opera House that went around the world. There's cause for her to resign for a number of reasons.
Well, let's repeat them. Resign, please. Please, resign.
But to say I applaud people getting involved, we all know what's happening. I mean, this is madness to have the police minister not just allowing this, but promoting it, applauding it. I mean, that is a sign that there is a sickness in the Minns government, no matter how good Chris Minns has been thus far and how centrist he's been.
But look at this. Look at these clowns. Look at these clowns.
Seriously, try and make your kayak out of basket weaving, sustainable, grasses or whatever, Adam, and see how far you get. Credit to Mark Speakman. We're always quick to criticise those bedwetting Liberals who seem to be confused about whether they're in the Liberal or Labor Party. Speakman often seems very confused. He was, I think, voting yes for the Voice not long ago. But he has come out, so we give credit where credit is due, in opposition to the offshore wind farms. Better late than never, Mr. Speakman. Glad to see you finally understood that you oppose a government is how you win. That's just
amazing.
It helps. Something the Victorian Liberals still haven't figured out, but let's just give them time. I'm sure they can be in opposition for a few more decades. But let's talk about the change here, because it comes as taxpayers are going to be up for a 5-fold increase in backing renewable projects. So they're going to be underwriting these projects. If they fail, we pick up the bill, and too often they do fail, or the costs go crazy.
Every time.
Again, this is another Chris Bowen ideological
There's a lot of detail in this plan here too. People need to understand what Chris Bowen has proposed here. And there's a number of things here that are worrisome, including the fact that it's written in such a way that we will never know how much is being charged to the taxpayer because it's all commercial in confidence for these bids that the renewable companies get to say, oh, well, you need to give us this much so that we can have a guaranteed return. But also, there's a proposal here to create 32 gigawatts of power. Well, 6 of that's coming from batteries. The rest is coming from renewables. The batteries only are, under the standard of the proposal, going to last for 4 hours. So if your weather event lasts for more than 4 hours and the wind's not blowing or the solar's not going, you're out of luck. It is shot through with economic idiocy, and it is simply doomed to fail. And I think part of the plan here, too, is to create another situation where, because of market interventions, it makes the renewables look cheap so that nuclear winds up being priced out of the game. This is what the game is about.
But the consumers end up paying. You'll just pay for it through your taxes.
And taxes or your bills.
We have to have complete clarity in how much this is costing. You cannot play tricks with commercial in confidence to try to hide this data, because this is crucial. And if you're wondering why so many people in the top end of town are all for renewables and really onto this climate change bandwagon, because they're invested in it, because they stand to gain enormously. And when the taxpayer is funding it, that money is guaranteed.
You take any current Albanese government policy and you've got the three I's. You've got the ideology, you've got the idiocy, and you've got the incompetency. And you take every single one of these policies, and this is right at the top of them, because we have Chris Bowen toddling off to Dubai next week, costing you a fortune, by the way, to the Climate COP28 conference, where he will be the lone bloke. Nigel, no friends in the corner of the room, because everyone else is going nuclear, and that's the way to go, which we could be the leading country in the world in nuclear. We've got the resources, we've got everything that you need, but no, we've decided we're going to be world renewables leaders. Complete disaster. As Rita says, the numbers simply don't add up. We've also got the Reserve Bank have come out and said, oh, by the way, interest rates are going to keep going up, inflation is going to keep, whatever it is, because basically Chalmers is a goose as well. Ideology, incompetency and idiocy. That sums up our economic policy under Chalmers. You can go through the rest of them. Burke with his industrial relations, Penny Wong with her insane foreign policies. James, is there anyone in Labor actually doing a decent job? Albanese obviously is doing a very good job of chalking up the frequent flyer miles, but that's about it as far as I can tell.
Yeah, no, they're in a real sort of state of disarray here. I think there's, if you look again, as I was saying before, on every single front, they're now starting to fall apart. I think the most worrying thing, actually, frankly, is on foreign and defense policy, where at the start they had a very, strong, it was put out there by Albanese to the team, do not make any point of difference between us and the coalition on this stuff, because it'll fall apart, and it's already falling apart now. We see this on Israel, we see this on the economy, we see this on Gaza, we see this on refugees. This government is falling apart, and falling apart fast.
We're going to take a short break. If you happen to be going to the Westpac AGM, someone has sent us in that the Westpac AGM is going to have a Westpac climate change position statement and action plan for you all to vote on. Vote it down or take your money out of Westpac. I'm not allowed to say that because I don't give financial advice on this show. But personally,
That's what you would do, Rowan.
I would be removing my money from Westpac if they're going to go down this insane climate change position statement and action plan. We're going to take a short break. Outside is back and tick. Lots more happening here.
You're watching Outsiders with your hosts, Rowan Dean, James Morrow, and I'm Rita Panahi. And shortly we'll be crossing to Ralph Scholhammer to talk about the astonishing result in the general election in Netherlands. Yes, this week, in the space of a few days, we saw the triumph of the Argentinian Trump, Javier Milei, and then the Dutch Trump, Geert Wilders. The anti-EU right-wing populist Wilders Freedom Party won the most seats in the Dutch general election. More on that with Ralph. But the pro-freedom celebration started in Argentina this week with the landslide victory of Javier Milei. This came after years of far-left Peronist rule, which has plunged the country into crisis, with the inflation rate hitting 143% earlier this month. Argentina has gone from a wealthy nation with an enviable standard of living to one destroyed by socialist lunacy. That's why firebrand Javier Milei, a conservative, a libertarian, a vehemently anti-socialist, anti-woke outsider, won the presidential election in a landslide. It wasn't close, folks, not close at all. Now, the world's media went into a predictable meltdown, similar to when Italy's centre-right Giorgia Meloni was elected Prime Minister last year. But the election results show Argentinians, including young Argentinians importantly, have finally woken up to the lunacy of watching close to half the population live in poverty, despite being blessed with abundant natural resources. Argentina is blessed with natural resources. Javier Milei is no milquetoast politician. He is a proud outsider who has been clear in his desire to tackle the bloated bureaucracy that has so poorly served the country. One of his campaign pledges was closing the central bank, and this weekend he confirmed that was an absolute non-negotiable. So let's have a look at what the rest of the bureaucracy can look forward to under Milei.
Turismo y deporte, afuera. Ministerio de Cultura, afuera. Ministerio de Ambiente y Desarrollo Sostenible, afuera. Ministerio de las Mujeres y Género y Diversidad, afuera. Ministerio de Obras Públicas, afuera. Aunque te resista.
Even if you resist, it wasn't done there. There was more. But Milei understands well that the ideological battle in Argentina and the West is not limited to economic policy. He understands the left's march through the institutions, the anti-West dogma, and the tactics they employ to destroy their opponents.
Al zurdo no le podés dar ni un...
¿Puedes definir zurdo de no
todos los que,
entiendo.
digamos, los colectivistas, los que ponen, digamos, o sea, esa idea... A ver,
¿Por qué le pones de mierda?
Porque son una... O sea,
vos mezclás...
si, no, pero
eso,
es que
eso
si
es
pensás,
pero
si pensás distinto te van a aniquilar. Ese es el punto. Es decir, vos al zurdo no le podés dar un... porque le das 1 milímetro y lo toma para destrozarte. Es decir, usa, digamos, o sea, vos no podés negociar con el zurdo. No se negocia. No se negocia con esa mierda, no se negocia porque te van a llevar puesto.
He never seemed more passionate. I just wish he'd just have a bit more energy about him. That's an interview he gave before the election, where he also spoke about how the left used the power of the state to crush their political adversaries. I don't know if he's talking about America or Argentina there, James. I'm not sure. Let's have a look.
Como los estamos aplastando en la batalla cultural, los estamos pasando de arriba, porque no solo le ganamos en lo productivo, somos superiores moralmente, somos superiores estéticamente, somos mejores en todo. Y les duele, les duele. Entonces, como no pueden pelear con las herramientas legítimas, se apalancan en el aparato represivo del Estado, poniendo torres de guita para hacernos mierda. Y aún así no pueden.
Since they can't beat us with real arguments, they use the repressive apparatus of the state to destroy us. Apparatus is a big word.
Apparatus is good.
Yep, he's not just talking about Argentina there. You can see that happening in many parts of the West.
¿En qué locura estamos viviendo? La locura de la corrección política estúpida, donde básicamente, no, si ustedes no recitan el socialismo cool, si ustedes no son woke, entonces son violentos, son un peligro para la democracia. Vamos, muchachos.
Muchacho. We'll see in the fullness of time whether he delivers on the comprehensive reforms he has promised or whether the apparatus of the state frustrates his agenda. But it would be folly to dismiss Milei as just some extreme far-right snake oil salesman as The Guardian has. They're really not coping too well with him this week at all. Now, Javier Milei may be colourful, but he's also a man of deep conviction with an impressive command of language. Just look at this.
Van a tener que vivir como viven los argentinos de bien. Se les acabó los privilegios, se acabó la joda. Yo no vine acá a guiar corderos, vine a despertar leones y están despertando y se van a comer crudo a los políticos chorros, se van a comer crudo a los empresarios prebendarios, se van a comer crudo a los sindicalistas que entregan a la gente, se van a comer crudo a los medios de comunicación que fueron funcionales a todos estos chorros para mantener este curro.
I did not come here to guide lambs. I came to awaken lions. He went on to say the Argentinian people are waking up and choosing liberty over slavery. As I said, time will tell if he delivers on his bold agenda, but it's worth noting the unhinged media coverage he has attracted, like Trump before him. And like Trump before him, despite being falsely labelled a fascist and a Nazi, Milei is ardently pro-Israel and plans to move Argentina's embassy to Jerusalem. There he is, waving the Israeli flag just a few days before the election. Argentina is another example of what happens when a country embraces far-left lunacy. Finally, here is a calmer Milei in an interview a few months ago, warning the West about what not to do and how you can fight back.
Que nunca abracen las ideas del socialismo, que nunca se dejen seducir por el canto de las sirenas de la justicia social, que no se dejen atrapar por esa frase nefasta que donde hay una ansiedad nace un derecho, pero que eso no se hace solo. Para eso hay que estar preparado y hay que dar la batalla cultural día a día. y que hay que tener cuidado porque ellos no tienen problema en meterse adentro del Estado y aplicar las técnicas de Gramsci, seduciendo a artistas, seduciendo, o sea, la cultura, seduciendo a los medios de comunicación o metiéndose en los contenidos de la educación. Hay que tener mucho cuidado, hay que cortarles el financiamiento y hay que hacerlos competir a la par.
Wow. What's happened there?
It's a new look. It's a new thing we're experimenting with. The important point there is, of course, Milei is attacking socialism. He's come hard out against socialism in all its form. Argentina, if the history of Argentina scares you, well, that is the prospective future for Australia. A resource-rich country that takes its own wealth for granted and then as it gets further and further into socialist, quasi-socialist, progressive politics to the point where you need a Milei to come out and go, no, he's got a chainsaw which he goes around and he's going to dismantle the bureaucracy with. That's where we are going in Australia unless we get Peter Dutton into the lodge at the next election. The socialists are destroying this country as surely as they've destroyed Argentina and as surely as they've been destroying the Netherlands. And this week we had another fantastic win for Conservatives. Finally, you'll remember Geert by C. Wilders, Geert Wilders, Geert, however you want to pronounce it. He's been around forever. In Dutch politics, he's finally won. Let's talk to Ralph Schulhammer about it. Ralph, always great to see you. We always go to you for what's happening in the Netherlands. This is terrific news. Tell us about it.
Oh, well, I mean, Lenin supposedly once said there are decades where nothing happens and then there are weeks where decades happen. And I think this is a little bit what we have experienced over the last couple of weeks. I mean, if you look at the polls in the Netherlands just 4 weeks ago, I mean, it was to be close, but it was not supposed to be a win of Wilders to that extent. I mean, basically 1 in 4 Dutch people voted for the Party for Freedom, for Wilders' party. That is, for Dutch conditions, basically a landslide, given the fact that pretty much everybody who wants to have a party in the Dutch parliament can have a party in the Dutch parliament. So this is quite the victory. Now, what we have to say, of course, is whether he will pull off becoming prime minister. That's going to be difficult because, as the new Argentinian president correctly pointed out already, the media, the left wing, the cartel between the media, the cultural, the artistic, and the politics, they're going to do everything they can to prevent Wilders from becoming prime minister. So this cultural fights that Milei is talking about is just about to begin. Now, I think the chances for the right to win it are better than they have ever been. But this is not as Churchill once said, this is not the beginning of the end, it's the end of the beginning. And the real fight is starting now.
James.
Well, so one of the things that I'm fascinated about looking at the results is that younger voters came out in force for Geert Wilders here and his party. One of the things that we're told in Australia repeatedly is that conservatism and the right is a dying ideology and that the young are all on the left. What is it about Wilders and his party that's so attractive, and what have the mainstream doing so wrong to get young voters offside?
Well, I think the two things we have to look at. I mean, Wilders did particularly well with young people and did also particularly well outside the urban areas. So this also applies to young people. They did very well with young people who did not live in the urban areas. For example, in Amsterdam, they got barely they didn't even get 10%, whereas the left coalition got 29%. So this is another divide that's going to happen in Europe as well and other parts, is the rural-urban divide. So a little bit what you see happening, not just in the Netherlands, is I say, many people make this idiotic comparison, like The Guardian and others, that this is like the 1920s and the 1930s and fascism is going to return. This is all nonsense. Neither Milei, nor Wilders, nor Le Pen, nor Meloni, none of them are fascists. It's more like the 1840s. You have a situation in Europe that is in many ways pre-revolutionary, but the difference to what happened about 150 years ago is back then, right, you had the urban centers kind of spreading out the ideology into the rural areas. I think what we are now seeing, it's the other way around. That kind of the conservative rural areas are starting to trickle into the urban centers. And I think this is going to be very interesting. But it's very difficult to say what's going to happen beyond the Netherlands, because as I said, I do not expect Wilders to become prime minister, but something else is going on. More and more people in Western Europe are losing the shyness they had in the past of voting for right-wing parties. To be also very clear, I think we have to change the conversation around this, because if you look at his program, there are some proposals that he has softened now. But overall, everything that the media calls far-right, pretty much everybody else calls common sense. So we have reached this point now where you have the overlap between, what quote-unquote for the establishment is far-right, for a growing number of people is common sense. And they start to realize this. And I think this is going to be the shift that's going to happen now, that the boogeyman of far-right equals Hitler, therefore you cannot vote for them. This is no longer going to work for the people, right? They're going to say, you told us this for 30 years. Like for 30 years, you wrecked the entire politics, you wrecked immigration, you wrecked the crime policy, you wrecked everything you could. And the only thing that kept us from voting for somebody else is you pointing the finger and say, yes, but they're like the Nazis. And nobody believes this anymore. And I think that the results in the Netherlands highlight this quite significantly.
Well, yeah, we're seeing it a wave through Europe, from Italy to Sweden and Finland and now the Netherlands. Now, he's also said that he's going to walk away from these radical climate policies, that the war against the farmers is going to be over. So what can we expect to see from the Netherlands when it comes to global warming policies, and how is the EU going to react to all this?
Well, let me once again refer to the new Argentinian president, because what Milei does, what makes him so special, and which also relates very well to Europe and also to Australia, Milei understands there's a difference between being in office and being in power. So even if Geert Wilders should become prime minister, there is an entire bureaucracy that has been marinated in a left-leaning worldview for decades. So to put it bluntly, he can be happy if he's prime minister, if they would, if he gives them a letter and they bring it to the post office. This is how the situation is. So you basically would have to purge significant parts of the bureaucracy, not just in Amsterdam, but also in Brussels. And this, we saw this, by the way, you guys mentioned it, with Donald Trump. Donald Trump had very ambitious ideas, draining the swamp and all of this. But he basically ran up against the bureaucracy in Washington. The State Department, for large parts, didn't care what he said, and so did other departments. Like, we have all these three-letter agencies from Washington to Brussels to Canberra, right? They pretty much say, we don't care who's prime minister or president under us. So the question is he willing to pick up that fight? Is he willing to say, if I want to see my programs executed, I need to make sure that the people in charge in the bureaucracy are people who are on my side, and that means that he would have to fire a significant number of those people who are currently in office. And whether he has the guts to do this or not, that's going to be the big question.
So, Ralph, kind of the big elephant in the room with Geert Wilders is racism, or, you said he's been demonised as being far right and so on. We've seen that. At one point, he wasn't allowed into Australia for some ridiculous reason. But his whole shtick, if you like, is that he believes that the introduction of mass immigration has led to what he calls the monster of radical Islam getting into the Netherlands and other European countries. Is that the driving force, or was it the farmers' strikes against climate that was the decisive thing, or was it both?
Yeah, it's a combination of both, and I would argue you could even throw the COVID policies into the mix. But the sense of the people is that they lose control over their country, right? The sense of the people is, again, from Portugal to Poland, if you want, is a sense that those who, the native population, if you want, should be in charge of policies. And this is something that a growing number of people in Western Europe have felt, that this has been slipping away. And this was the case, as you correctly point out. The farmers' issue was never so much the environmental question. It was the ruthlessness with which both the Brussels and the Amsterdam bureaucracy was basically running roughshod over the most successful farming industry in the world. As we talked in great detail, right, the Dutch farmers were always willing to adapt. They were always willing to make improvements regarding the environmental impact. It was the way they were treated. And the same with the migration question. Europeans, Australians, Americans are not against immigration. They have problems with immigration from areas that is culturally not really, where you have very, very different cultures. So nobody in Germany has a problem with an Austrian. Nobody in Australia has a problem with an American. So there's this idea that it's migration per se. No, it's migration from culture culturally distanced lands. And we see this now all over the West, that this is the major problem. And Wilders has actually always been very precise about this. Now, he talked about banning mosques and banning Islam and so, but I mean, he softened this. But we do have to ask the question, also in Sydney, right, not just in Amsterdam, if in certain mosques, open hatred against the West, open hatred against the Jews is preached, maybe you should close them down.
There you go. Ralph Schulhammer, always great to chat to you, and extraordinary news there out of the Netherlands, and we'll chat to you again soon. Thanks so much. Don't go anywhere. Lots more happening on Outsiders today. We've got Michael Danby. We'll be talking about the latest with the Israeli hostages coming up in a tick here on Outsiders. You're watching Outsiders, and thank you so much for watching Outsiders every Sunday morning. We certainly do appreciate it, and thank you for helping us be the #1 show on all of Sky News Australia. Now, importantly, hostages have been released. We've seen footage coming out this morning. I want to talk to Michael Danby, one of the very, very few sensible people, in my opinion, to ever be in the Labor government. Michael, I know there are, of course, many others of your colleagues, but I struggle to think of them immediately. Michael, great to see you. Good news this morning, more hostages. We've talked about, you know, there's a kind of bittersweet thing because, of course, Hamas, in my opinion, need to finish the job, and that the sooner that job is finished, the better for the world. What's your take on the hostage situation and the footage this morning?
I'm sure you're all pleased, like I am, that they're out. But don't you feel that the incredible resentment that we should be grateful to these medievalists, that they're dribbling children unjustly kidnapped into the dungeons of the Hamas metro? How outrageous is it that we should be subject to these people who want to live in the 6th century? The American president is being humiliated by Sinwar, the head of Hamas, at the bottom of those tunnels in Gaza, by him refusing to release the American hostages amongst those that have come out. The Israelis have a plan, Rowan, that I saw Mark Regev reveal last night, that they will allow Hamas extra days if they release 10 or 12 beyond the 4 days. So what that does is, if Hamas, who says they only have 80 people under their control, refuses to continue to let people out, the Israelis will be given international license to resume the military offensive. And I think that would be a good thing. I'm very worried about the American ability to hold up in this. They've been very good. Central Command's been shooting down those Houthi missiles in the Red Sea, and there are the 2 aircraft carriers there. But as General Keane has been reporting on the Sky Network, 65 American attacks on American targets in Iraq and Syria have taken place by Iran. The problem with all of this, and even the release of the hostages, Rowan and team, is the Iranians. We're all dancing to their tune. Yeah. The ring of fire that they've circled Israel with is what's causing all of this. And we're still stuffing them with money by not enforcing oil sanctions, by giving them subsidies. The Biden administration clings to this outrageous, outdated Iranian policy.
James.
Michael, I've spoken a lot about this as well, this recentering of Iran. It started under Obama. You've got it now under Biden here. But where can Australia take some moral lead here in standing up to Iran? Is there things that Australia can do to call for the resumption of sanctions, for calling out Iran in all of this?
If Penny Wong and Albo were real allies of the United States, they would be saying to the Americans quietly through the Five Eyes network, guys, step up. These guys are playing you. You can't allow your sites to be bombed. You can't allow ships to be arrested in the Red Sea. We're private allies of the United States, and we urge you to bomb some IRGC sites in Iran proper. It will not lead to war. Trump showed that with putting down Soleimani. The Iranians were as quiet as mice. If we don't do something more kinetic, this is going to get worse. And I'm pleased that the Israeli state has got some mechanism for dealing with the hostages beyond 4 days. We want them all back. It gives them priority. But if Hamas don't release them, the military operations will continue, and it'll be on Hamas's head. So you get the idea, Rowan? So beyond the 5 days, they have to release 10 or 12 more every day. And if they don't, back to military operations.
Rita.
Well, just on the hostage release, I'm interested in your response to this quite extraordinary exchange between Kay Burley, a UK news anchor, and the Israeli government spokesperson. Let's have a look.
I was speaking to a hostage negotiator this morning. He made the comparison between the 50 hostages that Hamas has promised to release, as opposed to the 150 prisoners that are Palestinians that Israel has said that it will release. And he made the comparison between the numbers and the fact that does Israel not think that Palestinian lives are valued as highly as Israeli lives?
That is an astonishing accusation. If we could release one prisoner for every one hostage, we would obviously do that. We're operating in horrific circumstances. We're not choosing to release these prisoners who have blood on their hands. We are talking about people who have been convicted of stabbing and shooting attacks. Notice the question of proportionality doesn't interest Palestinian supporters when they are able to get more of their prisoners out. But really, it is outrageous to suggest that the fact that we are willing to release prisoners who are convicted of terrorism offenses, more of them than we are getting our own innocent children back, somehow suggests that we don't care about Palestinian lives. Really, that's a disgusting accusation.
Michael, we've only got 30 seconds, but your response to that.
His eyebrows gave the answer. And it's absurd as some of those Marxists at Sydney University who condemn Israel because Israeli soldiers never rape Palestinian women. They say, don't you like them or something like that? These people are crazy. And she's shameful for retailing that question to him. There are much more serious questions she could have asked.
The role of the media, Michael, has been just disgraceful. Michael Danby, always great to chat to you. Keep up the great work. Thanks, mate. And we'll speak to you soon after the break. Tony Seabrook joins us following National Agricultural Day and National Mining Day in a tick here on Outsiders. Hello, you're watching Outsiders with Rita Panahi with James Morrow and myself, Rowan Dean. Well, this week we saw the death of the West staring us in the face on the streets of Melbourne. I'm sorry to do this to you on a Sunday morning. What I'm about to show you is, in my opinion, a grotesque and evil form of mass child abuse.
Hundreds of Victorian school students have walked out of class today to protest the war in Gaza. Here's what they had to say.
So what do you think the borders of Israel should be? Do you have an opinion on that?
I think they shouldn't exist at all. After what they're putting my brothers and sisters through, I don't think they should really exist. They don't deserve a place in humanity. After what they're putting my brothers and sisters through, they don't deserve a place in humanity.
Both Israel and Palestine should exist.
Why you decided to come out here today?
To protest the injustice in Palestine.
I came to show my respect, as our voices have been silenced in schools.
I wanted to support Palestine, to talk about the people who can't speak for themselves.
I feel like it's much needed in our community that everyone gets involved.
And what do you think of Hamas?
I think they're doing a good job. I think they should stand up for what's right. They should protect our brothers and sisters in Palestine.
Compared to what Israel's doing, Hamas is nothing.
I'm not too sure. What do you think of Hamas? Hamas?
What is that?
Hamas is doing a good job. Israel should not exist. Hamas, what is that? Says one. Good grief. Child abuse can be sexual, it can be physical, but it can also be mental and educational. All child abuse involves the betrayal of trust and the deliberate perversion of innocence by an adult or adults in positions of authority. The complete disregard for those women and girls who were raped, murdered, mutilated in Israel by those protesting school children should make every Australian recoil in sheer revulsion. Have these young Aussie girls and boys been shown this? I apologise for the graphic description and warn that this may cause distress.
They bent her over, and I realized they were raping her. Then she was passed over to a man in uniform. She was alive when she was raped. She was on her feet and bleeding from her back. He pulled her hair. He shot her in the head while he was raping her.
But I do not blame any of those Aussie kids for their terrifying naivety, nor their appalling ignorance or stupidity, nor for their appalling disregard for the suffering of others. Every one of those Aussie kids has been abused by our education system and by our political leaders. The Labor government of Albanese, Wong, Burke and Husic stand utterly condemned for peddling their repugnant ideology of moral equivalence, automatically contrasting the true evil of anti-Semitism with the quasi-fabricated cry at every instance of Islamophobia. And most of our academic, corporate and even religious leaders are not much better. We have sold these kids down the river through our cowardly cultural relativism. Decades of it. Let's be clear, on the streets of Melbourne, we have school children gleefully chanting the murderous cry of radical Islam, no better than members of the Hitler Youth calling for the death of Jews in Nazi Germany. Those behind this obscenity should be arrested, in my opinion, and if possible deported for inciting violence and ethnic hatred. Innocent schoolgirls parroting Hamas, girls who, by the way, were they themselves to fall into the hands of Hamas or any other jihadists, would soon learn what real rape culture looks and feels like. Blindly offering loyalty and sympathy to what is no better than a sinister psychosexual death cult. Where are the parents, I wonder? Believe all women, we are told, except Jewish women.
האמינו לנשים הישראליות.
לישראלסטות אמנו. Верьте израильским женщинам.
סתכל ניסה יהודיית. Believe Israeli women.
Where are all the famous feminists? All those women, you know, the ones who have clogged up the ABC and the airwaves for the last 2 decades, decrying the patriarchy, banging on about misogyny and toxic masculinity.
Who was dragged out of the trunk of a Jeep by a Hamas terrorist, it's part of a video, wearing sweatpants soaked in blood around her backside. I also sent this picture of Shani Luke. This is what her body looked like, with a Hamas terrorist on top of her. Look at her. Look at Shani. You want to discuss women in conflict? Women's rights? Women's dignity? What about the dignity of Naama Levy and Shani Luke? What about their rights as women? Sadly, to our briefers, the horrors endured by these young women are not worthy of mentioning. To the UN and its agencies, Israeli women are not women. Israeli children are not children.
That was the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, this week, deploring the fact that over 50 days since the savage massacre and rape of all those young women, the United Nations Women's Organization have not uttered a single word of condemnation. Instead, we have school kids siding with the rapists and murderers. Why? Here is an Iranian woman with a lively message for us all.
All of you who pretend to care about human rights and raise your flag to support Hamas, wow, you are beyond stupid. It will be an insult to stupidity. This is a call for people in America, in Europe, in Asia, and you Aussies. Hamas is using you, your politically correctness, and your woke schmoke movement against you. They use your innocent ideology while they do not share the same morals and values. It's actually funny. In the name of letting everyone have their own opinion and diversity because we need to acknowledge human rights, you're legitimizing exactly the opposite. You're legitimizing terror.
Here is a message from Rachel, a young Israeli girl.
Just a bunch of hypocrites. Where were you when more than 4,000 Palestinians in refugee camps were slaughtered in Syria's civil war? Where were you when it was exposed that the Palestinian Authority is torturing Palestinian prisoners? Where were you when 850,000 Palestinians were displaced in Syria's civil war? Where were you when Lebanese militias killed 2,500 Palestinian refugees in refugee camps? Where were you when Hamas dragged bodies of Palestinians through the streets of Gaza for cooperating with Israel? Where were you when Palestinian women were being raped by their husband because it is legal in Palestine? Where were you when innocent people were beheaded in Palestine for being gay? You will never hear about them. You will never hear about their story. You will never know they even existed. Nobody cares about them, and certainly not you. You can cry all you want. You're not fooling anyone. You don't really support Palestine or the Palestinians. You're just against Israel. You're an anti-Semite.
Well, I found one celebrity woman who was prepared to speak up. No, none of the usual Hollywood, Me Too, pink pussy hat mob, not those screeching Harrod and North Shore housewives of the ABC. But one woman who understands what is really at stake is Sarah Idan. She was crowned Miss Universe in Iraq in 2017.
Musician. I write songs. It's been my passion since I was a child. I'm brave, like since I was a kid, like I've always knew what I wanted to do in my life. I knew that I wanted to travel the world. I knew I wanted to be a musician. I always speak my mind. I'm not afraid.
And here she is, speaking to the Epoch Times the other day about what Hamas really means for women.
They think that this is a prophecy that's, in order to bring the Messiah and Mahdi for them, the Mahdi, they have to kill every Jew. They have to end Israel. For them, it is part of jihad to take sex slaves. They believe that women represent honor. So if I rape your women, then I take your honor away. And this is what I understood, because they were telling me that in their messages. I will do this and that to you. And I'm like, what do you get out of this? How can you hate me? How does that make sense? But then I understood from their context and all of that, they believe that they will take your honor by that and they will break you, like spiritually and mentally. It's very, very barbaric, very monstrous ideology.
And here she is speaking up about those ludicrous allegations we saw on all the school kids' posters of Israel being an apartheid state.
They keep shouting apartheid, apartheid, and when they say that, I'm like, you've never been to Israel, because if you've been to Israel, you would know there is no apartheid. When you see Muslim women wearing hijab, walking besides Jewish men wearing kippah, you know there is no apartheid.
And her comments were echoed by Natasha Hausdorff, who's a legal director with the UK Lawyers for Israel Charitable Trust.
When I worked in the Supreme Court in Jerusalem, I worked under an Arab justice. There are currently Arab members of parliament sitting in Israel's Knesset. There are Arab doctors, there are Arab lawyers, there are Arab army officers who are, as we speak, defending the people of Israel against this heinous, barbaric terrorism.
And here's Natasha also spelling out the real plight of Palestinians, not the phony one embraced by the left, but the real plight.
Where are the people speaking out for the way that the Palestinians have been treated in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Egypt, and in the West Bank? Where are people standing up for real Palestinian rights? Because you can take it from me that the Israeli Arab community are the only free Arabs to live in the Middle East. That's why many of them are actually now defending their country, Israel.
Yet instead of our school kids being taught that, we get this.
I'm not too sure. What do you think of Hamas? Hamas?
What is that?
For them to just go kill someone and then get 15,000 lives in return, that's unfair.
I think that Hamas is really having an effect on Israel.
Obviously what the Hamas did is not okay, but shutting off
their water supply and all their food supplies, and bombing and killing thousands of children is not okay.
What do you think the borders of Israel should be?
I think Israel should exist, but they don't really deserve to exist with all the stuff they've done.
I think obviously Israel should exist. I just think that Palestine needs to be free.
I think they shouldn't exist at all.
At this point, no. I think they've done enough. I think it's time to go.
Both Israel and Palestine should exist. However, Palestine should be able to go outside, go to school without having fear that they're going to get bombed.
The women and girls and boys, school kids of Australia, have been thoroughly and utterly betrayed. The teachers and head teachers behind this grotesque intellectual child abuse should be fired. Fired. The Labor government of Anthony Albanese, Penny Wong, Tony Burke and others has shown itself utterly incapable of providing any moral guidance at this critical time. They have no moral clarity, no intellectual or philosophical grasp of the existential threat to our Judeo-Christian values and democratic way of life posed by their vile left-wing narrative of cultural equivalence, suckled on Karl Marx's perverse fairy tale of oppression and victimhood. A narrative lapped up and promoted by the Islamo-fascists and neo-Marxist abusers, polluting our schools and universities and poisoning the young minds of the Australian children under their tutelage. School kids that these left-wing child abusers have thrown into the moral embrace of the jihadist death cult. The same jihadist death cult that, as Rita said earlier, is responsible a couple of days ago for publicly hanging and dismembering 2 young men this week that they accused of being collaborators, to the enthusiastic applause of the baying, iPhone-waving mob. This is the sickness that Australian school children are being aligned with deliberately. There are times when political leaders must show clear, unambiguous moral clarity. Labor's failure to totally repudiate these pro-Palestinian death cults in every shape and form and condemn all those who offer even qualified support to Hamas is utterly reprehensible. Labor's presence on the government benches diminishes us all. Shame on them. Earlier this week, on a lighter note, I'm pleased to say, the National Mining and National Agricultural Days took place, a joint event that celebrates the critical role that both mining and agriculture play in this nation's prosperity, in our history, and in our cultural well-being. I was honoured to attend both events on behalf of Sky News Australia. The National Mining and National Agriculture Days are the brainchild of Gina Rinehart, the mining and agricultural magnate. Peter Dutton was at the National Mining Day event at the extraordinary Roy Hill mine, deep in the Pilbara, as were other politicians, Pauline Hanson, the One Nation leader, Keith Pitt from the Queensland Nationals, Susie McDonald from the Queensland Libs. I looked hard, but I didn't spot our Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, nor indeed anyone from Albo's Labor Party, which is a disgrace. You would have thought that Bowen and Albo and Chalmers may have been slightly interested in showing their support for an industry or 2 industries that prop up our entire economic well-being, that just last year alone added $197 billion to the Australian economy and paid $63 billion in company tax and royalties just last year. As Gina Rinehart pointed out, mining is the absolute backbone of this nation. Yet around the world, while they are busy building hundreds of coal plants, we are shutting all 6 of ours down to save the planet.
Platitudes and press releases move precisely 0 tonnes of iron ore, copper, nickel, rare earths, or any other mineral. Our National Day is an opportunity to remember we truly are the engine room of Australia. Let's not forget, we contribute more revenue than all other industries in Australia combined. And we need to encourage our governments not to forget this either.
As I repeatedly heard, red tape, green tape, and now black tape. Any number of onerous and often ludicrous government rules and regulations, excessive environmental rules and regulations, over-the-top Indigenous cultural rules and regulations are now seriously threatening the viability of many projects in our north and around the country. I heard some real horror stories. Some of the individuals I spoke to are now even warning of sovereign risk, threatening major projects from going ahead with overseas investors, now freaked out, many of them, by our insane cult of regulations, government regulations, this approval, that approval, environment, Indigenous, yada, yada. Our governments, particularly Labor governments, instead of doing everything to keep mining and agriculture as our most important industries, well, they seem hell-bent on crippling them. Joining us now is Tony Seabrook. Tony, you remember from The Voice. He warned us all about the WA cultural heritage laws. Well, Tony, he made a brilliant speech at the National Agriculture Day. He joins us now. Tony, great to see you.
Morning, Ron. Well done.
Morning. You focused in your speech very much on the crippling effect of not only environmental regulation and government regulation, but also now we have Indigenous regulation thrown on top of that. And the poor old farmer spends most of his time filling in forms.
Oh, Ron, it just gets worse every day, every year. Look, that international body that did a study on Australia's place in the world from a whole range of different perspectives, we rated 4th 19 years ago, 4th. We're now 19th. Now, that's a terrible thing in its own way, but to heaven's sake, it's a trend. It's not stopping. We're getting worse. And everything you've just said about government interference, regulation, red tape, green tape, black tape, it just continues to get worse and no one seems to give a damn.
James.
Earlier this week, Gina Rinehart made a very eloquent plea to cut the petrol excise tax, but in the course of doing that, she also talked about the Roy Hill mine and the 4,000 different applications and forms and permits that were required to get that going. Tell us, that's a large mine, but tell us how all of these things affect agriculture as well. What are some examples of the things that the people who grow our crops, who raise our cattle, raise our livestock for food, for other products, have to contend with that makes life so difficult and things so expensive?
Look, it's just such a creeping, crawling little thing. It's like the frog in the pot of water quietly being boiled. You don't notice it, but bit by bit they hem us in, a regulation here, a regulation there, all the issues around transport. And look, that excise on diesel fuel, on any fuel actually, it's not such a bad way to raise money to fix roads, but this isn't. This is a huge contribution to federal government income, and they can't help themselves. It makes us less competitive. And as a world economy, we absolutely have to be competitive. And you don't notice it as quietly those that get overcome by the costs of doing business, or even as Gina said, the mines that don't get started because of the amount of red tape. The cost of the way that bureaucracy is hammering down on all of us, agriculture and mining, it precludes so much of a bright and brilliant future that we might have. And it's all dressed up under these kind words of fair work and wages justice and progressive, words stolen by the left to describe some of the most dangerous policies this country's ever seen.
Rita.
Tony, we've talked about Chris Bowen at the top of the show. He's the radical ideologue, we know that. But what about the agricultural minister? What do you think about Murray Watt? Is he up to the job? Was he there at the National Agriculture Day?
Look, what was missing on the day was anybody from the Labor Party. Now, I actually sat down, and look, Chris Bowen's been on Insiders today, and the guy, he has no depth whatsoever, no understanding. But look, the mine that Gina started up, 2017, she had the most extraordinary battle against bureaucracy and everybody that was there, so-called to help, getting in the way. But I added up some of the figures she presented on the night that Rowan and I were there. $10.3 billion. $10.3 billion is the contribution of that single mine to the economy of Australia. Now, that's tax, royalties, a whole range of different things, but it certainly doesn't take into account all those people that are working there when they go back to Perth or wherever in Australia they live, and they spend that money. It generates a buoyancy that we just would not see. And then you see those poor little kids, marching in the street about climate change and the canoes on the beaches up in Newcastle, demanding we stop exporting coal. They haven't got the faintest idea of what the implications would be if they actually managed to carry the day. You've got coal exports here, $142 billion a year to our economy. Do they really think that you can turn that money off and it'll be okay, that things will continue? All the things that they hold dear to themselves just won't be possible. And I just see this government being so out of touch with the reality of why an economy must work.
Tony Seabrook, always great to chat to you, and thanks so much for speaking to us. National Agriculture Day and National Mining Day were this week, and absolutely every Australian needs to know how much those industries are the backbone of our nation. Coming up, lots more. We've got a very special guest, Steve Vizard, in a tick, here on Outsiders. Can't wait.
Well, hello there. You're watching Outsiders with Rowan Drumstick Dean and Rita Making Gravy Panahi. And it's just been Thanksgiving in the United States. It was a culinary reference, Rowan, not a musical one, which can only mean one thing: the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York City, where a new act was added: Hamas apologism.
Oh, God.
Here's vision of a mob of pro-Palestinian protesters rushing out to block that agent of Zionism, beloved McDonald's character, Grimace. Yes, have a look at these protesters here. They've really dug themselves in, and just looking at them, well, you know that they wouldn't last between 5 and 15 seconds if they were suddenly to wake up and find themselves guests of the Palestinians in Gaza. Now, the crowd, though, they weren't buying it. Enjoy the long weekend in the cells, friends. The judge will not be hearing cases until Monday. But while we're on the subject of New York, there's something else funny going on there. The mayor, Democrat Eric Adams, who a year or two ago declared the Big Apple a sanctuary city, is having, well, some regrets. He's realized the burden Biden's open borders policies have placed on his city, and he's warning of massive cuts to services. Have a look at this.
But for months, you've heard me talk about the fiscal challenges our city is facing as the costs of the asylum seeker humanitarian crises have skyrocketed. And if circumstances don't change dramatically, city agencies will be forced to reduce city funding spending by 5% 2 more times within the next 6 months. That would mean disruptions to the services we all rely on.
In the past few months, Adams has warned that the migrant crisis would, quote, destroy New York City. And he has been forced to slash budgets for schools, police, libraries, and trash pickup. He's also been a very vocal critic of the Biden administration. So I am sure, and I mean absolutely sure, that it's just a complete coincidence that the FBI has opened an investigation into the mayor, alleging a scheme involving dodgy campaign donations from Turkey that involved a dramatic raid by the FBI, seizing all his electronic devices. Now, the mayor complied with that, but he's also continued to complain about the burden on New York placed on it by the Biden administration. So again, I'm sure it is just a coincidence that he has also been suddenly this week accused of a historic sexual assault dating back to 1993. Allegations which, of course, along with the funny money business dealings with Turkey, Adams has completely denied. But, look, I know some of you outsiders might be a little cynical, might be thinking, hey, this is what happens when you have a terribly radically politicized FBI that looks the other way at Biden family crimes while using all its investigative powers to bring down the enemies of the administration or its critics. But no. Come on, let's put that away. I'm sure this is all above board, and all this dirt dropping on a high-profile critic of the Bidens is just a coincidence.
Thanks, James. Well, as I mentioned last week, my book on the brilliant Barry Humphries is released this week, The Many Lives of Barry Humphries, in which I not only tell the story of my own personal relationship with Barry right up until his tragic passing earlier this year, but more importantly, I interview some of the many actors, comedians, artists, musicians, filmmakers, friends and family of Australia's very own Renaissance man, Barry Humphries, including one of my very favourite Australian comedians and the mastermind behind so many of our great comedy shows, Steve Vizard. Who can forget this classic?
You saw someone else wearing those over-the-knee boots you bought in Milan.
Much worse than that.
You ran out of your favourite henna?
No, worse even than that, stupid.
Give up.
I was in the cockpit when the captain was sucked out.
Can't beat classic comedy, Steve. Great to see you. Great to see you, Steve. So fantastic.
Surely there must have been another clip.
Just no. There were many. There are many, but they're all so great. They're all so great. Steve, you're a mastermind, one of Australia's greatest comedians.
Oh, wow.
There are literally thousands of great takes. How important was Barry Humphries? You knew him well as, I guess, the godfather of Australian comedy. How important was he to Australian creativity?
He was a giant. He was the equivalent of. He was our Oscar Wilde. He was our Mark Twain. He right up to the very end. His life was as he was living life full as a Catholic school, as he would have said, or full as a fairies phone book, as he would have politically incorrectly said. Full as a seaside shithouse Boxing Day, as he would have said. That's how he lived his life. And when you think about it. Many performers would be regarded as having completely full careers if they performed for 6 or 7 years. I mean, that would be a great career. He performed at the highest level internationally for 6 or 7 decades, and he charted the life of Australia. Not just his own career, he charted the life of a nation for 6 or 7 decades. He started in the 40s and in the 50s. His first big Dame Edna sketch was at the Olympics when he was offering up Edna's house. She wasn't a dame then. Edna's house in Moonee Ponds for guests for the forthcoming Melbourne Olympics, and she was offered to have an Alsatian and a Dane staying with her, and she wondered how they'd go with her fox terriers. Through the 60s and through miniskirts and 70s and freeing up Australia through Gough Whitlam, through that era. And in the 80s, the 90s, decades and decades of Australian change, Barry Humphries charted through the course of his brilliant characters. You know, Dame Edna, of course, was the one that was most noted. That.
Whoop, we've just frozen there, Steve. Rita.
Well, he did have great international success, but at his heart, he was a Melburnian, and it's all where it all started. And Steve, I'm interested in your response to what happened with the Melbourne Comedy Festival, for them to get rid of the Barrys, rename the Barrys in response to Barry Humphries not being sufficiently politically correct. That stung him. That hurt him.
It did hurt him, and to the point, as we now discover, he didn't want his commemorative service in Melbourne. He regarded Melbourne as having, the establishment of Melbourne as having some way turned its back on him at a critical time. What I'd say about that is this. I mean, Humphries had strong views in what he expressed on stage, but he was a libertarian. His view was that they were his views, but other people should be able to express their views. He saw the purpose of the stage, and indeed the purpose of comedy, of humour, as being provocative. He didn't posit his solutions as being final. And in fact, it was clear that whilst they were strongly held in the form of characters and their lines and their viewpoints, they were his viewpoints. And I think he always saw comedy as a provocation. And the danger, I think, is lot of comedy these days as being posited as a solution, as this is how it has to be. And I think that'd be the key distinction between the way he practiced comedy, that is, as opening up a discussion to some comedy, and indeed some dialogue today as closing down discussion.
And I wanted to follow up on that because, you know, there's this whole thing we talk about in comedy today where they put it all in power relations, you know, and punching up versus punching down. Yet a lot of what he did was kind of punching up, like Sir Les Patterson. And I'm just wondering, does Australia, do you think, and would he have thought, take itself too seriously today that it can't, you know, there can't be that sort of universal humor that makes fun of our foibles as a nation?
It is the purpose of comedy, someone said, to patrol the boundaries of a society. It's the very purpose of comedy to puncture and promote, provoke, to pinprick, to make us question. And it's going to overstep the mark. It's by definition, if it's working on the boundaries, and in fact, the very purpose of working on the boundaries is to help us form a view of what's permissible and what's not. So it's always going to be patrolling the boundaries. That's what comedy, that's what great comedy does. That's what Humphries did. So to the extent that we shut down that patrol...
We've frozen again, Rita.
Just on that issue, do we have a problem in this country in particular where our comedians are more interested in getting right on applause and in making a political point than actually getting laughs? Has the main aim of comedy been lost, which is to be funny? Now, we see people like Dave Chappelle and Ricky Gervais pushing the envelope and being outrageously funny, but do you feel like there's a climate of self-censorship a little bit in this country, Steve?
There's been a change in the way comedy's done, I think. As I was saying, I think comedy, and this is worldwide, it's not just Australia. Comedy used to be an opening up. It used to be a lot in the form of characters, for example, characters that were imagined characters. So the author of the characters, the performer, wasn't themselves making a political point of their own. They were positing a character, making a preposterous proposition. There's been a shift now to a much more authorial view of performance. The performer is expressing not a character's view of life, not someone else's preposterous view of life, but their performance is almost intrinsically aligned to their own views, politically, culturally, socially, and so and with that comes a clear enunciation of.
Steve, I've referred to Barry Humphries in my book as a kind of Renaissance man. I love the story you told me about when you took him around the art gallery. Just remind us of that story, because he was so much more than just an actor. He was a comedian, he was an artist, a painter, he was a musician, and you had a strong friendship with him. Tell us about it.
I was walking around the National Gallery of Victoria with him, and we were looking at the paintings, and I said, how do you see yourself as an artist? And he sort of stopped one of his dramatic pauses. He said, artist? I'm a collector. And I said, collector? And of course, he was a collector. He collected Condor, he collected paintings, he collected literature, first editions. But he was fundamentally a collector of something greater than that. He was a collector of colloquialisms, of expressions, of characters. He was a collector of what made a nation tick. And I think, as I said to you, he did something extraordinary every night. Every night on a stage, he stood there and unveiled his collection before an audience. And we laughed in self-recognition. He'd collected us. And then he collected something else. He collected laughter, and he collected applause, and he collected our undying admiration. He self-effacingly said he was a collector.
Fantastic, Steve. And I believe he said to you that when you get used to Federation Square about the time you get used to having leprosy. He wasn't a great fan. He wasn't a great fan of modern architecture.
It's hideous.
Steve Vizard, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders today. We might get you back again, mate. You're pretty good. You're good on telly.
No. You've cut into my bunning sausage time, but and interestingly, on the Macy's Street Parade, you missed the biggest thing of all. The Bluey was there. There was a huge inflatable Bluey going down the street, and that overtook everything.
Fantastic. Steve Vizard, thanks so much for sharing that with us this morning. And as I said, Steve Vizard's recollections are just some of the treasure trove of reminiscences and photos, along with those of Geoffrey Rush, Kathy Lett, Ray Martin, Bruce Beresford, Alan Jones, and many, many more in my book, The Many Lives of Barry Humphries. Limited pre-Christmas print run, so don't miss out. Go straight to www.michaelwilkinsonpublishing.com.au. We're going to take a short break, then Ice Age Watch. Hello, you're watching Outsiders Weather and the Skeptics Ice Age Watch, the show that admits that being a climate skeptic or even, scary climate denier, whatever that is, can be a heavy load. It's a heavy burden to wear, carrying around all that doubt and all that realism and all that Galilean scientific method and pragmatism. But that is our lot, I'm afraid. But speaking of heavy loads, what we have here, according to a study published last month in the Journal of Field Archaeology, is a 2,000-year-old piece of bark folded with 2 rows of stitching along one side with sticks stitched into its sides, suggesting it was part of a reinforced basket used for transporting heavy loads over 1,400 years ago. What we also have is this 6,200-year-old stitched animal hide, which is likely the remains of a moccasin-like boot. It has 2 different thicknesses of hide, which have been stitched in multiple places, the study says. And here we have a 3,000-year-old pair of sticks wrapped in animal hide, as well as this 5,300-year-old antler shaped like an ice pick. The 3-pronged antler had 1 sharpened point, 1 blunted one, as if used as a hammer, and 1 broken but presumed to be used as a handle. All in all, the archaeologists behind this study uncovered dozens of ancient artefacts spanning 7,000 years, and, I hear you ask, well, here's the thing. All these artefacts were discovered in several melting ice patches. Indeed, all of these amazing artefacts have been locked in the Canadian ice for nearly 7,000 years. Moccasins, tools, carrying bags, and so on. All of which begs the question, how did these human artefacts get under all of that ice? And which suggests a rather awkward conundrum. One possible explanation is, I don't know, that that specific location must have been warmer all the way back then 7,000 years ago than it has been at any point since up until now. Afraid so, dear. Meanwhile, speaking of freezing conditions, the UK Telegraph reports that an Arctic blast is set to bring sub-zero temperatures and snow this week. Forecasters predict it could reach as low as -6 degrees across rural parts of Scotland as cold winds arrive from the north. I wonder what our sponsor would say about that.
Humanity is in the hot seat. The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived.
Thanks, matey. Yes, I digress. According to Alaska Life, which bills itself as Alaska's news source, we've hit a record. They are referring to this chart, which shows Anchorage has just had the snowiest November since records began back in 1956, with 39.1 inches of snow. They only had 23 inches back in 1982, 29 in 2003, and now 39.1. That's a lot of snow, Antonio. As one wag commented on Facebook, "Oh my God, we're freezing because of global warming." Meanwhile, temperatures are forecast to bust many a monthly benchmarks from the UK to Russia as is the snow, according to the climate skeptic website Electroverse, adding to what is already being described as, quote, Europe's best start to a ski season in memory. But it's not just shivering snow bunnies who are feeling the chill. So too is Wall Street, where, according to the Wall Street Journal, investors continue to quietly scrub terms like sustainable, global impact, carbon transformation from fund names, and are also busy closing ESG, that's environmental, social, governance, investment products. I seem to remember warning about that over a year ago. Although products, they continue to cash out. Sustainable funds lost $14 billion so far this year, according to Morningstar. At least 6 funds announced they would drop their ESG mandates this year, while another 32 will close. As Electroverse concludes, their words, not mine, the green movement is experiencing major setbacks, namely offshore wind, electric vehicles, EVs, and investments. And offshore wind projects are struggling to secure financing and to stay on track. Meanwhile, Bloomberg reports that the US and the UK will lead their pledge to triple nuclear power by 2050 at this year's COP28 climate change talks. These countries will support new nuclear technology like small modular reactors as a critical component for reaching net zero. Quote, the US will lead a push at the COP28 climate summit to triple the amount of installed nuclear power capacity globally by 2050, making a major turnaround for the controversial technology at the climate negotiations. Which means this fool, Chris Bowen, a vehement opponent of nuclear, despite the fact it literally has zero emissions while operating, this man, who is now at odds with the US, at odds with the UK, at odds with most of the world on the topic of nuclear energy, he's the bloke we are sending to COP28. So may I tactfully suggest to Mr. Albanese that a far better bet would be to send the eminent geologist Professor Ian Plimer, or the distinguished marine physicist Dr. Peter Ridd, or even, dare I say it, the 3 of us here on this show would make far better and more persuasive and better informed representatives at the COP28 Climate Change Gabfest in Dubai next week than the clownish Chris Bowen, who now stands completely isolated and out of touch with mainstream global thinking on energy. Take a look in the mirror, baby, Chris. Or as Simply Red's Mick Hucknall would say,
wait a minute, it's wrong. Even the birds still sing their faithful song. And your
At 8 p.m. this Tuesday night, Sky News Australia is premiering the fascinating documentary What Really Happened in Wuhan, The Next Chapter, which is the next phase of Shari Markson's in-depth reporting into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic and high-level cover-ups. Shari joins us now. Shari, great to see you. Exciting, very exciting. Tell us what we can expect on Tuesday night at 8 p.m.
Look, the first documentary was 2 years ago. As you remember, we had Donald Trump, Secretary Mike Pompeo and John Ratcliffe, who headed up the intelligence agencies in that documentary. This one takes the investigation even further. Rowan, you know we've all been talking about Anthony Fauci and the role that he played in covering up COVID-19, any suggestion that it came from a laboratory. Well, I've got someone from his inner circle, someone who was actually technically Fauci's superior, facing the cameras for the very first time. It's his first ever television interview. And he reveals that him and Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins actually decided to downplay any suggestions that COVID came from a lab so that the American public would think it was a natural virus. He's sitting down on camera. I ask him if he feels guilty about it. Is this why he's agreed to this interview, to front the cameras? He says he feels an obligation to tell the public what they decided to do, how they decided to divert attention away from the lab leak, why they decided to do it. So it's a really fascinating interview. He says he still lies awake at night worrying about what he calls the downstream effects from the decision they made, him and Anthony Fauci, early in the pandemic. And the downstream effects, as you know, includes that what should have been investigated right from the start, the fact that this virus in all likelihood came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, instead that was considered a conspiracy. Anyone who spoke about it was labelled a conspiracy theorist, and it was censored by tech giants.
Shari, fantastic. So last year's conspiracy theory becomes this year's fact. That's always the way. Fantastic work, Shari. We'll be watching Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Brilliant work there. Can't wait to see it. And lots there to be exposed by Shari Markson. Tuesday night, 8 to 8:30 p.m. What really happened in Wuhan, the next chapter. Brilliant. Rita, you've got some breaking news.
Well, we're learning more about the latest group in the hostage exchange. We know there were 8 children. Among those children was Emily Hand. Now, we've played footage here of her father, and he's just given some absolutely heartbreaking interviews in the past. There they are, back reunited. And again, the Irish Prime Minister has put his foot in. You would think on a joyous day like this, when you get one of yours back and she's got Irish heritage. But no, he's posted, this is a day of enormous joy and relief for Emily Hand and her family. An innocent child who was lost has now been found and returned, and we breathe a massive sigh of relief. Our prayers have been answered. She wasn't lost and found and returned like a pair of sunglasses. She was kidnapped by the Islamist terrorists of Hamas. She was kidnapped and held hostage for 6 weeks. I mean, this is just, again, what we are seeing for these weak leaders in the West. He knows precisely what he's doing with that language.
This Irish PM, too, is a real clown. He's a real joke, and we need to talk about him more next week, because, you know, there was that incident in Dublin this week where,
tell us about it.
where an Algerian migrant stabbed kids, and there were riots because people were so upset with the migration situation in Ireland. Now, he is proposing, what's he going to do? Crack down on migration? No, he's going to crack down on free speech. And he's been saying that he's going to introduce new bills to allow the police to check your phone or to punish you for having the wrong memes and hate speech on your phone. So that's where we are in the West. And this is why people like Geert Wilders wind up winning elections, because they say, no, it says like what Ralph said earlier, it's not far right, it's common sense.
Well, there is. I mean, what we saw in Dublin, I mean, that was just so sad to see that in a city like Dublin. But the people are fed up. We don't back rioting, but
of course not.
They need to be better served by their leaders.
And you're right, the press originally downplayed it, said, oh, no, it's we don't know why this guy was wandering around stabbing people. And as James was saying, we have seen that immigration does seem to be behind a lot of these tragedies in Europe and around the West. That's it for Outsiders. We'll see you next Sunday, 9 a.m. Can't wait to see you then. Now it's Ross Greenwood with Business Weekend.